The Bhagavad Gita, chapter 1, verses 12 to 19. Thus, to bring joy to his army, Bhisma, grandsire of the Kuru dynasty, blew his conch shell. It vibrated loudly like the roar of a lion. In response, the Kurus rang out with conch shells and large drums, small drums and kettle drums, as well as horns. These suddenly sounded all at once, and the combined sound became deafening. On the opposite side, a great chariot with white horses were Krishna and Arjuna. In response, they sounded their divine conch shells. It's noteworthy here that, this is verse 12 to 14, by the way, that Bhisma, the commander of the Kauravas, he sounds out his conch shell, which makes sense. He's the general, right? The conch shell was this big shell that warriors, people of the warrior caste in that time would have with them, and it was a very important symbol to them. It represented their will, it represented their connection to spirit, and so it was, and it was of practical use. It was like a trumpet, you could say, right? And so it's a very symbolic gesture. At the beginning of a battle, a commander will blow his conch shell. But on the other side, on the side of the Pandavas, the people who come up to respond to the blowing of Bhisma's conch shell, are not the commander, who is Bhima, or the king, Yudhishthira. It's Krishna and Arjuna. It's Arjuna who comes up on the chariot of white horses that Krishna is charioteering for. So again, you see this symbolic interaction there between, on the one hand, the Kauravas are being strict materialists. They've got the commander of their army. He's the boss. He's the one that blows the conch shell. And all the rest of them are banging drums and making noise, and they make this deafening roar, and so they're trying to scare the enemy, right? Now the Pandavas, the first person that comes forward and blows his conch shell is Krishna, who is not the commander of the army. He's just a chariot driver, but he's the spiritual head of the Pandava army. He's the guru. He's the one that they all recognize as being the one that is closest to the real and most natural in his ways. So to continue from verse 15 here, Krishna blew the conch shell named Pankajanya, and Arjuna blew the conch shell named Devadatta. Also, Bhima, famous for feats of strength and a voracious appetite, blew the conch named Pundra. The conch named Anantavijaya was blown by the son of Kunti, King Yudhishthira. Nakula and Sahadeva blew the conch shells named Sugosa and Manipuspaka. Also, the king of Kasi and great archer Shikandi, and the great warriors Drishtadyumna, Virata, and Satyaki, who had never been defeated in combat. Drupada, the son of Draupadi, as well, my king, and the son of Subhadra, the great-armed, each and all blew their conch shells separately. That vibration shattered the hearts of the sons of Dhritarashtra, and the sky and the earth were all resounding tumultuously. So you'll notice first that they all name their conch shells. So this is a representation of how important it is, how they value this connection that the conch shell represents to the higher. Every one of their conch shells, or at least of the Pandavas and of Krishna, has a name. But beyond that, you'll note the difference between the noise that the Kauravas make and the noise that the Pandavas make. In verse 13, you can see that the Kauravas, they let Bhisma blow his trumpet first, his conch shell first, because he's the commander. And then after that, they're all banging on drums and making this enormous noise and this deafening roar, and their whole point is just to scare the enemy, to scare the Pandavas. They're all doing it at once. They're all acting at the same time. And yet what they create is a cacophony. So they represent the consensus, the mass thinking, the communal thinking, where everybody's doing the same thing, but nobody is actually doing it with the benefit of vision or understanding. So it's just everybody doing their thing and banging their drum and making their noise and creating this sound and fury signifying nothing. On the other hand, the Pandavas, they all blow their conch shells, but they do it separately. They do it in order. So you see first Krishna does it, and then Arjuna, and then Bhima, and then Yudhishthira, and so on and so forth. And they each add, each one in turn adding to what the other one has established, right? You have a procession of the vibration of this conch shells. They're all doing it separately. They're all doing it as individuals. They aren't doing it in this kind of mass communal way that the Kauravas are doing it. They're each expressing their individuality when they blow their conch shell, but they're doing it with a common and united purpose. They're all doing it with consciousness. And so this is a tremendous difference. They're showing here how a harmonious society should operate, and also how a sangha, how a mystery school operates. That each person is making their own music. They're each making their own individual sound, their own vibration. So it's not a question of conformity. But each person is contributing. They're vibrating with this common purpose, this common cause. They're all sharing in this greater goal of this single sound. And all of their sound ends up being an individual expression of the same vibration, which is reality, because they understand that there's a single common understanding, a single vibration of reality. They're all vibrating the Om in a way. And so from this, they create something. Whereas the other side, at the one hand, it says, okay, everybody can do their own thing, everybody can bang their own drum and whatever, but they have no real allowance for individuality. They're all doing the same thing. They're all in a way conforming to this consensus of communalism, but they're not really expressing any meaningful individuality there because they have no understanding of truth. Without truth, you can't really express individuality. It's fine and good to say, oh, I'm an individual. But if you don't actually have a level of awareness to back it up, then actually you're most likely just saying what it's considered fashionable to say as an individual. You know, to say that you're an individual as part of the consensus idea, because being an individual is cool, right? But the real individual isn't somebody that goes around and makes a lot of noise. It's somebody who can understand the nature of truth and then act to express their individual version, their individual expression of that truth. So it's a tremendous difference. And this is why the Kauravas in this battle, they create this enormous noise, this enormous roar, this sound, that they intend to scare the enemy. But the Pandavas, they're not intending to scare the enemy. What they're intending to do there is express their connection to truth. They're using the conch shells for what they're meant to be, a sacred act. They have sacredness with them. And in that sacredness, they end up expressing their individuality. They end up contributing to this common cause. And they end up terrifying the Kauravas. They shake both heaven and earth. The Kauravas don't have any way to affect heaven, so they also can't affect earth, because you have as above and so below. The one's microcosm is a reflection of the macrocosm. And so if you're not conscious of what's going on in the bigger picture, you really have very little control over your individual life. And that's what is represented by the Kauravas here. The Pandavas don't care so much about themselves as the Kauravas. The Kauravas are the self-absorbed, the self-directed people who, ironically, in caring so much about themselves and so little about the bigger picture, have very little power to affect the world, or for that matter, to help themselves. But the Pandavas here represent the ability to put yourself aside for a higher cause, to step out of your own way and to understand that you're not as important as you might think you are, and to put yourself to one side for the sake of the bigger picture, the reality. And in that, ironically, you end up redeeming yourself. You end up being able to do something for your own being that you could never do as long as you're constantly self-referencing, or as you could say, self-absorbed, as long as it's about you. When you understand that spirituality isn't about you, then suddenly you can actually do something for yourself. So if you're united to your will, then heaven and earth will shake. Heaven and earth will vibrate with you as you vibrate. And that's the message of these verses.